On our anniversary, I watched my husband drop something into my wine glass when he thought I wasn't looking. Please stay with me as I tell you this because what happened next still feels unreal. We were sitting in a dimly lit Italian restaurant, the kind with candles on every table and soft music playing in the background. The smell of garlic and fresh bread drifted through the air. A waitress had just set down our drinks, his whiskey, my wine. He was smiling, but it wasn't the warm smile I knew. It was tighter, like he was forcing it. I glanced down at my menu, pretending to be deciding between pasta or risotto. That's when I heard it. A faint metallic clink, too soft for most people to notice but sharp enough to make my skin prickle. My eyes shifted up just in time to see him leaning back casually, his fingers sliding something small into his pocket. My heart thudded against my ribs, but I kept my face calm. He didn't look at me right away, which told me he didn't know I'd seen. When his eyes finally met mine, they were too bright, too expectant, as if he was waiting for me to drink. The stem of the wine glass felt cold in my hand, heavier than usual. I swirled it slowly, pretending to enjoy the color, my mind racing. My husband and I had been married for 7 years. I knew the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, the way his voice changed when he was lying, and the way his hands fidgeted when he was nervous. Tonight his hands hadn't stopped moving. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Go on," he said lightly, nodding toward my glass. "You'll love this one." I forced a smile. "I will. I just need to freshen up first." His eyes narrowed just for a second before he shrugged. "Sure, babe." I picked up my purse and walked toward the bathroom, feeling the heat of his gaze on my back. My steps were steady, but inside, panic was clawing at me. Once inside the narrow hallway near the restrooms, I stopped, breathing hard. My mind was screaming at me to leave, to run, but something colder took over. A waiter passed by carrying a tray of drinks, and I caught his sleeve. "Can I ask you for a quick favor?" I whispered, glancing toward our table. In a hushed rush, I explained that I'd made a mistake with my drink and wanted to switch it with my husband's without him noticing. I offered him a tip big enough to keep him from asking questions. By the time I returned, both glasses were back on the table, exactly where they'd been. My husband smiled as I sat down, lifting his glass and taking a sip. I lifted mine too, but my lips barely touched it. And that's when I knew, whatever he had planned for me was about to happen to him instead. That morning had started like any other anniversary we'd celebrated, at least on the surface. The sun was spilling through the curtains, warm against my face. I woke to the smell of coffee drifting in from the kitchen and the faint sound of cabinets opening and closing. When I stepped out of the bedroom, he was already dressed. Crisp shirt, pressed pants, shoes polished. Usually he lingered in pajamas until we both started getting ready, but not today. He handed me a mug with a bright, happy anniversary, and a kiss on the cheek. His lips barely touched my skin, and for some reason it didn't feel the same. I told myself I was imagining it. After all, it was our special day. I wanted to believe it was just nerves or excitement, maybe even a surprise he had planned. But then I noticed he kept glancing at the clock, almost as if he had somewhere else to be. The first time I brushed it off. The second time I started to feel a knot forming in my stomach. While I sipped my coffee, his phone buzzed on the counter. He snatched it up quickly, turning slightly away as he read whatever was on the screen. His jaw tightened for half a second before he tucked it into his pocket. We had planned to spend the afternoon at home before going out to dinner. I thought it would be lazy and romantic. Music playing, maybe a walk before heading into the city. Instead, he paced around the living room like he was waiting for something. I'd catch him standing near the window, staring at the street, then pretending to adjust the blinds when he realized I was watching. When I went to change, I chose a black dress I knew he liked, pairing it with the silver earrings he'd given me on our first anniversary. I caught my reflection in the mirror, smoothing my hair, telling myself to stop overthinking. He appeared in the doorway, smiling. It looked perfect, white teeth, relaxed eyes, but it didn't reach all the way to his expression. There was something just behind it, something closed off. On the way to the restaurant, the car ride felt different. He made small talk, asking about my day, but his tone felt rehearsed, like he was keeping the conversation alive just enough to fill the silence. Every so often, I'd notice him tapping the steering wheel in a steady rhythm, his thumb moving like he was counting down in his head. By the time we pulled into the parking lot, I had convinced myself it was nothing. But deep down, a quiet unease had already settled in, waiting for its reason to come to the surface. The moment we stepped inside the restaurant, he seemed unusually decisive. Normally, we would linger over the menu, debating appetizers, teasing each other about our choices. This time, he took control before I'd even unfolded mine. "We'll start with the bruschetta," he told the waiter without glancing at me, then added, "and she'll have the house merlot." I looked up, surprised. "I was thinking maybe." He cut in smoothly, "Trust me, you'll like it." It wasn't that I disliked wine, but on special occasions I almost always ordered a cocktail. He knew that. Still, I let it go, telling myself maybe he was trying to create some sort of planned experience for the night. As we waited, his attention kept wandering. He would look at me, then glance past my shoulder, then down at the table. His fork tapped against the edge of his plate in a steady, distracted rhythm. When the waiter returned with our drinks, he slid mine closer with a little too much enthusiasm. "Perfect," he said almost to himself. I picked up the glass, but before taking a sip I studied him. His eyes weren't on me, they were on my hand, tracking every movement. I set it back down, pretending to reach for my napkin instead. The conversation between us felt thin, stretched tight like a rope ready to snap. He asked about work but didn't listen to the answer, nodding absently while scanning the room. His phone vibrated once in his pocket. He ignored it, but his jaw clenched so slightly I almost missed it. The bruschetta arrived, but he barely touched it, urging me to eat while he just pushed his around. "Go on," he said when I hesitated. His tone was light, but there was a strange urgency underneath it, as if my taking that first sip of wine was more important than anything else on the table. I laughed softly to break the tension, asking, "Why are you watching me like that?" He shrugged, giving a quick smile that didn't linger. "Just happy you're here with me." The words sounded right, but the way he said them felt wrong. Flat, almost rehearsed. I found myself sitting back, holding onto my glass but keeping it untouched, wondering why my own husband suddenly felt like a stranger. The waiter had just stepped away to bring our entrees when I bent down to adjust the strap of my heel. From that lower angle, my eyes caught something they wouldn't have noticed otherwise. His hand hovering over my glass, fingers pinching a tiny packet. A faint shimmer fell into the wine, sinking like dust into water. He gave the glass a small swirl, the liquid catching the candlelight in slow, lazy ripples. My breath froze in my chest. The sound it made was barely there. A soft tap, almost like a grain of sugar hitting porcelain, but it sliced through the muted clatter of silverware around us. My skin tightened as if the air in the room had suddenly turned cold. I straightened slowly, careful not to startle him. My pulse thudded hard in my ears, each beat making my hands want to tremble. Instead, I slid them into my lap, pressing them together until my knuckles ached. He leaned back in his chair, looking as though nothing had happened. His eyes flicked to my glass, then back to my face, his smile stretched just enough to pass for casual. The smell of the wine seemed stronger now, as if it knew something I didn't want to face. The rim of the glass caught the light, glinting like it was daring me. My throat felt dry, almost scratchy, though I hadn't spoken a word. I kept my gaze steady on him, matching his expression with one of my own. Inside, my chest felt heavy, my heartbeat quickening in sharp bursts. Every instinct screamed to stand, to shout, to knock the glass over and watch it spill across the tablecloth. But I didn't. I sat still, a picture of calm, letting him believe I hadn't seen a thing. The hum of conversation from nearby tables seemed distant now, muffled beneath the rush of blood in my head. My fingers brushed the stem of the glass, just enough to make him think I was about to drink. He watched intently, almost leaning forward, anticipation hidden behind his polite posture. I smiled faintly, letting my hand fall back to my lap, and asked about the drive over, as though nothing unusual had happened. He answered with a casual tone, but his eyes stayed locked on the untouched wine. I let a beat of silence pass before leaning back in my chair. "I'm just going to freshen up," I said lightly, pushing my chair away from the table. His gaze lingered on me for a second too long, then he gave a small nod, lips curving in what might have been encouragement. The hallway to the restrooms was narrow, lined with framed photos of old city streets. My steps were steady, but inside, everything was rattling. I could feel the thud of my heartbeat in my palms, a low hum of panic under my skin. Halfway down the corridor, a waiter carrying a tray of glasses passed by. I caught his attention with a quiet, "Excuse me." My voice was calm enough to mask the urgency underneath. I explained in the most casual tone I could manage, that I'd made a mistake with my order and needed it switched with my husband's, quickly and without him realizing. The waiter hesitated, brows pulling together. I met his eyes and slid a folded bill into his hand. "Please," I murmured. That was enough. He gave the smallest nod and disappeared toward our table. I stayed by the corner watching from a distance as he worked. With practiced ease, he set down a small bread basket, picked up both glasses and returned them moments later, each one in the opposite place from before. My chest loosened just slightly, but the knot in my stomach held firm. I took a slow breath, adjusted the strap of my purse and walked back as though nothing had happened. He looked up when I returned, smiling warmly, oblivious to the change. I matched his expression, sliding into my seat, fingers curling around the stem of the glass that was now safe. He didn't waste a moment before lifting his own, taking a measured sip. I kept mine close but untouched, nodding along as he spoke about the meal ahead. My hands were still trembling under the table, but my face was calm, my voice steady. If he noticed anything different in my demeanor, he didn't let on. And as he drank, I sat there quietly, my pulse slowing to something almost manageable, knowing the balance between us had just shifted entirely. He raised his glass again, tilting it back with the ease of a man enjoying a fine drink. I mirrored him, letting mine brush my lips but never crossing the line into a swallow. The candlelight caught in the red liquid of his, glinting as it tipped toward him. At first nothing seemed different. He spoke about the restaurant's decor, pointing out a painting on the far wall, his tone light and measured. But after a few minutes his voice began to shift, words dragging just slightly, like each one had to travel farther to reach his mouth. I nodded along, keeping my eyes on him, not the glass. A faint sheen began to form on his forehead. He dabbed at it with his napkin, chuckling as if the warmth in the room was to blame. I leaned forward a little, resting my chin on my hand as if engrossed in every word. Inside, my thoughts were racing in jagged bursts. What had he planned? How far would he have gone if I hadn't seen? Every blink felt slow, my focus narrowing to the details of him. The way his pupils seemed larger now, the slackening edges of his smile. He reached for the bread but missed the basket by an inch, laughing softly at himself. "Guess I'm clumsier than I thought," he said, the consonants rounding out in a way that made my skin tighten. I tilted my head, offering a small smile, the kind that could pass for affection. My hands rested loosely on the table, but beneath the linen, my nails dug crescents into my palms. His gaze flickered over my shoulder, then back to me. He blinked hard, as though trying to clear a fog from his vision. Another bead of sweat slid down his temple. The hum of the restaurant faded in my ears until it was just him and the steady sound of his uneven breathing. I sipped at my drink again, just enough to keep the illusion alive. He swallowed more of his own, unaware of the shift overtaking him. I kept my expression soft, calm and steady, while inside, 100 sharp questions clawed for answers I wasn't ready to demand. He reached for his glass once more, but his fingers fumbled against the stem, nearly tipping it over. A quiet laugh escaped him, though it sounded strained, the edges frayed. When he pushed his chair back to stand, it scraped loud against the floor, turning a few heads nearby. He rose halfway before his knees buckled, sending him back down with a thud that rattled the table. A fork clinked to the floor. Conversations around us paused, the warm murmur of the restaurant shifting into a sharper hum of curiosity. I leaned toward him, placing a hand on his arm. "Are you all right?" My voice carried just enough worry to match the scene, my brow furrowing for effect. Inside, I watched every twitch and falter, noting how his eyes struggled to focus on my face. "I'm fine. Just dizzy," he murmured, but the words were slurred, running into each other. He tried again to rise, gripping the edge of the table for support, but his legs trembled beneath him. A couple at the next table glanced over, whispering to each other. A waiter approached, concern etched across his face. I turned to him quickly. "I think he needs help. Can you call someone?" The waiter nodded and hurried toward the kitchen. My husband slumped further in his seat, his breathing shallow. I brushed my hand across his back, steady and measured, the perfect image of a worried wife, though my pulse stayed even. Within moments, a small crowd had formed, staff, diners, a man offering to check his pulse. I stepped aside as one of the servers brought over water, but he waved it away weakly, his head lolling slightly forward. The distant wail of sirens began to rise, growing louder with each passing second. I stayed near his side, murmuring soft reassurances while watching the fog in his eyes deepen. When the paramedics entered, their bright jackets cutting through the candlelit room, the space seemed to shrink around us. They moved with swift precision, checking his vitals, asking me brief questions I answered without hesitation. He tried to speak, but it came out as a groan, his body too heavy for his words to carry. As they lifted him onto the stretcher, his gaze found mine for a fleeting moment. Something flickered there, confusion, maybe recognition, but it faded before I could be certain. I stepped back to let them pass, my hand resting lightly over my chest, a mask of worry firmly in place as they wheeled him out into the night. The hospital room was dim, lit only by a strip of fluorescent light above the bed. Machines hummed softly, their monitors casting pale green glows that flickered against the walls. He lay there, pale and sluggish, an oxygen clip on his finger and a slow drip feeding into his arm. A doctor entered with a clipboard, speaking in a careful tone. "We found traces of a sedative in his system," she explained. "Do you have any idea how that might have happened?" I widened my eyes, letting my hand drift to my mouth. "No. I don't understand. We were just having dinner." My voice carried the confusion and concern they expected, my fingers twisting together like I was trying to hold myself steady. She asked a few more questions, about our evening, about anything unusual before the meal, and I answered with the kind of uncertainty that leaves no clear path. When she finally left, the room settled into a hush broken only by the slow beeping at his bedside. I moved closer, pulling the chair beside him. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, but they found me after a moment. His lips parted, dry and cracked. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, leaning close enough that only he could hear. He blinked slowly, his breath uneven. I needed." The words trailed off before he tried again, his voice a strained rasp. "Money. The account. All of it." The sting in my chest sharpened. "And then what?" A pause, his gaze slipping toward the ceiling as if searching for strength. "She was waiting. Said we could leave tonight. Needed you out." The words stumbled into silence, his lids drooping again. I sat there, still as stone, watching his chest rise and fall. The distant sounds of footsteps in the hallway and muffled announcements over the intercom faded against the weight of what he'd said. He didn't notice the way my hands slowly tightened around the arms of the chair. By the time his breathing evened out into a sedated sleep, my face had already softened back into the expression of a wife who had no answers, only worry. By the time morning filtered through the blinds, I had already decided how this would end. The nurses assumed I was just another wife keeping vigil, eyes fixed on her husband while he recovered. They didn't see the thoughts turning over in my mind, sharp and deliberate. When the officer came to take a statement, I gave him a simple version. Nothing unusual before his collapse, no mention of the glass, no hint of what I knew. My voice stayed even, my expression mild. They left with polite reassurances, none the wiser. Once I was alone, I stepped into the corridor and made a quiet call to the bank. My name was on every account. The funds were ours on paper. By the time the elevator reached the ground floor, I had moved every dollar into a new account he couldn't touch. The next call was to a lawyer I knew through a friend. We arranged a meeting for the following afternoon. Her voice was brisk and certain, exactly what I needed. I told her I'd bring documentation. I would also bring something better, the proof. That came from his phone, which I'd slipped into my bag while he drifted in and out of medicated sleep. The messages were easy to find. Thread after thread with a name I didn't recognize, her words thick with expectation. Hotels, plans, talk of the money and how quickly they could disappear once it was done. His replies left nothing to doubt. I composed one message from his account, attaching the hospital wristband photo and a single line. "He won't be meeting you." Then I hit send. Back in the room, he stirred, mumbling incoherently. I set his phone on the bedside table, screen dark as if it had been there all along. My chair scraped softly against the floor as I sat, hands folded neatly in my lap. When the nurse came in to check his IV, I thanked her warmly. She saw a loyal wife staying by her husband's side. She didn't see the quiet satisfaction behind my calm. Everything he'd meant to take from me was already gone. Except me. That he could never have. The air outside was crisp, the kind that wakes every nerve in your skin. Pale light stretched across the parking lot, softening the sharp edges of the night before. I walked without looking back, my steps steady, the weight in my chest lighter than it had been in years. Inside that building he lay in a bed with machines keeping track of every beat and breath. His accounts were empty, his plans dismantled, his partner in betrayal silenced. Whatever story he tried to tell from here would have no footing. Every thread he'd spun was already cut. The city was just beginning to stir. A bus hissed to a stop across the street. A newspaper stand clattered open. The scent of fresh bread drifted from a nearby bakery. Life moved on, oblivious to the fact that one man's world had just been reduced to ruins. I reached my car and unlocked it, the metallic click sharp in the quiet morning. My reflection in the window looked calm, composed, almost untouched. I opened the door, slid into the seat and let my hands rest on the steering wheel for a moment. Don't judge me. Until you've watched the man you trusted most try to poison you. Do you think I did the right thing by walking away, or should I have given him a chance to explain? I've gone over that night in my head 1,000 times, and I still wonder what others would have done. I'm honestly curious. What would you have done if you saw the person you loved drop something into your drink?